Namaste, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for my presentation about the Indian vernacular typography. My name is Shantanu Suman, and I'm a graphic designer and an art director from India, currently living in Muncie, Indiana, and working at Ball State University as an assistant professor of visual communication. I hope that my presentation today will provide some insight about the use of vernacular typography in India and how I have been trying to use this knowledge to inform my own research and design practice. Now, before I get into the presentation, I want to clarify that the Indian typography in itself is a very broad topic to cover in a single presentation. So today I want to focus on the Hindi language and Devanagari script, since Hindi is my mother tongue and I use Devanagari for my design work. I was born and raised in an Indian middle-class family in a small industrial city in central India. And during the 80s and 90s, I received my education at a private English medium school. Now in India, there is a federal government directive that schools across the country should embrace a 3-language formula. This means that the students must study a mix of their regional language plus Hindi and English. Since my local language was also Hindi, my education was primarily in Hindi and English. And just so you know, the Indian subcontinent is home to about 1,600 languages, out of which 23 are officially recognized languages that are written using 10 different scripts. That means many languages often share the same script. So what does the term vernacular mean? And what is Indian vernacular typography? According to Merriam-Webster dictionary, the term vernacular means a language or a dialect native to a region or country rather than a literary, cultured, or foreign language. You'll notice that the words literary and cultured are being used to differentiate the foreign language from a native language. And if you dig deeper, you will find that the word vernacular itself is rooted in the Latin word Verna, which means a slave born in the master's house. During the past 200 years, European colonial powers took over several countries, most of which were non-Western countries. And these colonial powers rationalized their takeover by projecting the non-Western countries as inferior and incapable of looking after themselves, despite the fact that these countries had done perfectly well for centuries. To this day, some of the non-Western countries like India are called developing countries because they are believed to require development in order to be at par with the Western and developed countries. India was under the British rule for about 200 years. And during this colonial rule, British formulated an overall education policy for India in 1835 using Lord Macaulay's Minutes on Education. Macaulay claimed that a single shelf of a good European library was more valuable than the collected native literature of India and Arabia. And the first step for implementing this colonial education policy was to replace the traditional Indian languages by introducing English. During this time, the policy of divide and rule was used in education, and this created divisions between the English medium and the vernacular medium of education. To run their empire smoothly, the colonizers needed Indians, and so they offered English education to a small number of Indians who could help them in this endeavor. And to this day, this colonial policy is so deep-rooted in the Indian ideology that English medium education is considered to have more cultural capital and symbolic power than an education in an Indian vernacular language. And most school kids in India have to select between what is called a vernacular medium and English medium tracks of schooling. India has witnessed a cultural shift by implementing and supporting an education policy that was discriminatory towards the local vernacular languages. And if you're thinking, what does this have to do with typography? Let me explain this further. According to Robert Bringhurst, the author of The Elements of Typographic Style, typography is the craft of endowing human language with a durable visual form. Similarly, language can be described as a medium for expressing thought and creating knowledge. And then knowledge in terms is generated through research and leads to social change and cultural development. So if you follow the trail, typography helps in developing the language helps build knowledge, and knowledge helps in shaping the culture. And this is why, in a diverse country like India, vernacular typography plays an important role in representing the local culture. After finishing my undergrads from New Delhi, I worked for about 7 years in the Indian advertising industry as an art director. In 2010, I decided to take a break from advertising and pursue higher education in the US. I consider myself a type enthusiast, not an expert. And my own interest in working with Devanagari script started about 8 to 9 years ago when I was a graduate student at the University of Florida. I think what happens when you come from a previously colonized culture is that you tend to have two sides of your identity. There was one part of me that was trained to think that the Western world is the North Star. And then we try to mimic the Western culture in our lifestyle, including education, thinking, food, clothing, work, and behavior. And this can be a result of the institutionalized education and work culture. But then there's this other part of our training, which is based on our native culture, politics, economy, infrastructure, and the overall reality of the post-independence India. During my advertising days, one of the default approaches that I witnessed was to use a Western design reference as an inspiration and put it into the Indian context. This experience and training could also be seen in some of my early projects, as you can see on the Futura poster on the left. This was done in grad school, and it led to work that seemed stuck in Western design models, but created by a non-Western designer. And I had to work very hard to unlearn that default approach. So for designers like me who come from non-Western cultures, to really embark on a journey of exploring our culture through our practice, it becomes a difficult yet important first step. In 2010, when I started my graduate studies, the inspiration for my work had to come from a personal space and experiences. Ever since my advertising days, I have been fascinated by the automobile decoration in India, more specifically the truck art of India. Apart from playing an important uh, role in shaping the Indian trade industry, the Indian trucks are also known for their sheer lavishness and intricacies of their ornamentation. So in graduate school, I decided to use this as a topic for my thesis project. During the summer of 2012, I traveled to India and I was assisted by two close friends, Ishling Mirche and Sridevi Babuji, who helped me successfully complete the documentation for the Indian truck art. The data collected during the India trip acted as a valuable resource to develop a documentary film in the name of Horn Please. You can see the poster of Horn Please on the left-hand side. The documentary was made with the help of a lot of people who donated their time and energy because of their shared love for the art form, and also to help preserve part of our Indian culture through this documentary. When we were traveling across India to find the origin of Indian truck art or the people who had started it, we kept hitting dead ends. The truck painters whose forefathers had started this practice didn't know when and how it all started. And in 2012, there was hardly any documentation about the history of the truck art of India. To our surprise, we realized that at that time, truck art had existed in India for about over 70 years. And the Horn Please documentary was probably going to be the first ever documentation of this art form. During the making of Horn Please, there was one critical point that I often discussed with my team. Is this art or is this craft? Now, the question required me to explore the history of colonial education in India. Under the British rule, 4 art schools were set in India that contributed to cultural imperialism by teaching young Indians that their traditional art was not as finely developed as European art. The fascinating thing about researching any of these Indian vernacular art forms is that once you start digging deeper, one thing leads to another, and you will realize that most of these art forms find their origin in the pre-independence era, when India was under the colonial rule. Artifacts such as the hand-painted trucks of India, shop signages, hand-painted Bollywood billboards, and matchbox art can find its origin in the calendar art. And given that the calendar art emerged in the second half of the 19th century, at the peak of colonial rule, it can be described as having been born in the master's house, thus earning the name vernacular art. Aesthetically, these vernacular art forms have been criticized for their imitativeness and repetition and loudness. And on nationalistic grounds, it has been called a Western influence and un-Indian as opposed to the rich classical and folk traditions. And on ideological grounds, it has been condemned for being part of a commercial culture industry that feeds on the ignorance of the masses. But then I think that this mindset has deprived generations of designers in India and around the world from learning from India's incredible repository of vernacular design knowledge. In addition to the documentary, I also worked on some creative projects for my MFA thesis exhibition. Here are some examples. In order to create these pieces, I had to start working with a variety of medium, including screen printing, letterpress, laser cutting, 3D printing, film editing. And I also made some games, such as this board game that you see the bottom left, Truckopoly. The rules were based on the truck industry of India, and use rubber at night playing cards. And these were both inspired by the truck industry of India. But the most important thing that happened during this time is the fact that the research and making of Hornpleas and various other projects associated with this thesis exhibition provided me an excuse as well as an opportunity to start working with Hindi typography. So after working on Hornpleas, Sridevi and I paired up again to work with Taxi Fabric and developed one of our first major projects using Devanagari script. In 2013, as per the Global Status Report on Road Safety, approximately 231,000 people died due to road accidents every year in India. And one of the top 5 cities that faced the highest number of casualties was Mumbai. Speeding was a common reason for such casualties, and the speeding was either encouraged by the passenger in the hopes to reach the destination quicker, or it was the driver's decision in order to save time and earn an extra buck. The keep distance concept was an amalgamation of these two aspects that influenced a Mumbai taxi driver the most. Their need to make their taxi look attractive and their responsibility to drive safely and lawfully. The design included multiple messages and couplets in Hindi covering the taxi entirely, including the front seat, back seat, roof. Hindi was used as a common language so that it could be read by the driver as well as the passengers. The messages were intended to be conversation starters and reminders for everyone in the taxi to be safe on the road. The design was created and was inspired by hand-drawn typography, truck art motifs, and floral patterns. The type design was inspired by various elements of the Mumbai's streetscape and the daily life, including signboards, film billboards, advertisements, architecture, truck art, as well as packaging. And the Keep Distance project was applauded and endorsed by Mumbai Traffic Police, and they wanted us to have more such initiatives to promote a better driving culture in the city. The next project that I want to share with you all today is a commentary and celebration of the plurality and chaos that defines India. Now, before I talk about this project, I think it's important for me to talk a little bit about Hinglish and its prevalence in the Indian culture. For quite some time now, there has been a growing tendency to write Hindi in Roman letters and the coining of hybrid words that are native neither to Hindi nor to English. And the cumulative result of all these developments is Hinglish. So this project imagines a hypothetical situation in which the Indian administrators have decided to ban the use of Hinglish and make Hindustani the national language. And in order to appease the administrators, the Hindi film industry is has decided to change names of movies with English titles to Hindi names. This poster shows how this censorship regulation can lead to a situation where popular cinema starts looking like exploitation cinema, and it can be very difficult to differentiate between a controversial political statement and low budget movie titles. Although the irony about this poster is that modern Hindi and modern Urdu both emerged out of Hindustani, and in the 1930s, Mahatma Gandhi himself wanted to make Hindustani the official language and Devanagari the official script of India. Well, clearly that didn't happen. And then the final project that I want to share with you all is actually an ongoing exploration. In an article for the Bulletin of Deccan College Research Institute, Rahul Maheshkar explains the term Romanagari. According to Rahul, Romanagari is a morph of Roman and Devanagari. It's a vernacular word coined and used by internet users, which refers to Hindi text written or typed in Roman script as opposed to the standard Devanagari script. A possible reason for this is that Hindi speaking people who use computers and mobile may lack the skills for typing in Hindi. The Roman keyboards provide the ease for creating Romanagari words. With Hindi and English becoming popular, Hindi is doing whatever it takes to survive in a world increasingly saturated with information that is conveyed through the written or spoken word. The spread of Hindi in Roman letters means that literate Indians are forgetting or sometimes not even bothering to learn how to read the Devanagari script. Through this ongoing project, I'm hoping to reverse the roles of both scripts, Latin and Devanagari, Roman and Devanagari, by creating English text written in the Devanagari script. The project doesn't have an agenda or any end goal. Rather, it's a personal exploration through which I am trying to basically just understand the consequences of what happens when the master starts wearing the slave's clothes. So my graduate school experience was powerful and unconventional. It made me realize that I could be an international designer with a vernacular flair. I have been working with the theme of Indian vernacular design and Devanagari script for over a few years now, and it has been very liberating once I stopped aping the West for my design solutions. For me, reframing the Indian vernacular is not about having a bias towards India or believing that my own cultural heritage is somehow superior to others. It is about doing a deeper analysis that can help me develop a better understanding of why India is the way it is, and also to create solutions that are more finely tuned to Indian values and beliefs. Thank you.